All right, well, welcome into another podcast episode from Tailscale. My name's Alex. I am the head of developer relations here, and I'm joined today by Avery, who is the CEO of Tailscale. I'm joined by Kabir and Harry as well. Welcome, chaps.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you.
And we're here today to discuss Tailscale's Winter Update. This is one of our seasonal updates that we re-release most quarters now. And we're going to take you through a bunch of new features, exciting stuff that's coming, going to be released this week, loads of stuff being made generally available. We'll get to all of it throughout the episode. There'll be chapters down below, of course. But I want to just quickly remind you at the top of the show that Tailscale's user conference is now back. Starting in it's going to be in San Francisco, not starting in San Francisco. But as of today, we have early bird pricing available. So you can get $200 off until the end of March. If you buy your ticket today. So come join us in San Francisco on August the 26th. All right, so Avery, I'm sure we don't need to introduce you very much, but do you want to give a quick intro, say hi, who you are, and that kind of thing?
Hi there, I'm Avery. I'm one of the co-founders of Tailscale, and I'm the CEO, and this is the famous bed in the background for those of you watching on video.
I think that bed might be employee number 2 in the company, if I'm honest with you.
It wins awards, actually, on Twitter.
Which awards?
Oh, Brad nominated it for ratemyzoomroom.com, and I got a 9 out of 10. Oh, sorry, no, that's not true. 1 out of 10.
1 being good?
No, I don't think so. They said it's, what was it? Raised $80 million in financing. Please spend $75 on a setup.
That's true. There's a bunch of fun accounts like that. There's another one of just give me plates, which is a bunch of people serving food on anything except plate. And my favourite, I think, is like a full British fry-up served on a shovel.
Ooh, I mean, you could go to a restaurant where they would pay for that.
I know, but just give me a plate anyway. And Kabir, welcome in. Would you like to tell the good people what you do here at Tailscale?
Yeah, hello. I'm Kabir. I do product management here at Tailscale. I'm primarily focused on our data plane and network engineering teams, which delivered a lot of the features we're going to talk about today.
Lovely stuff. Yes, you've got a couple of really exciting things in our show doc today to tell everybody about. So you'll hear more from Kabir as we go. But last and by no means least, Harry, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you. I'm an engineer on our network features team. We work on things like subnet routers, app connectors, and services, which we will be talking about today.
Yes, sir, indeed we will. Now, what is Winter Update? I'm going to get into a little bit of just sort of housekeeping before we get going. Essentially, the Winter Update is about how we move Tailscale from being just a VPN, which of course I'm doing a lot of heavy lifting with the word just there, into a platform for connected applications, workloads, and systems as well. And we have a huge announcement in the AI space. Don't worry, Tailscale's not turning into an AI company, but we've got a really interesting solution for AI users, which you'll hear more about shortly. Before we go too much further, I also want to remind you that this week we have a webinar on Thursday as we record, so a couple of days after you see this video, with Jay Stapleton and Adrian Dewhurst. They're going to be talking in full detail about everything we're about to announce in this podcast episode. So, without further ado, let's get into the first headline topic. Tailscale's now an AI company, right, Avery? No.
Well, we're a company that transports AI packets all over the world, which we have been actually for a while now. But the thing we're getting into is trying to reduce the friction and increase the security of carrying those packets inside your organization, in particular if you're using agentic AI.
Absolutely. And now we are, of course, referring to the brand new product that was just soft launched, maybe last week or the week before, called Aperture by Tailscale.
It actually originated when we were thinking about adopting AI at Tailscale, and there are various different things that are good about AI, and especially agentic coding. But when our security team looked at it, they were like, oh my God, what are you thinking? You're letting a random computer execute programs on your laptop. So what are you going to do about the fact that this random computer is going to be executing random programs? You need to isolate it somewhere. We had a big discussion about containers and stuff, and the answer was like, look, there's no container that this thing can be trusted to not break out of. So you should really be running on a different computer. Well, if you're running on a different computer and I can't give it access to keys and stuff because it's probably going to exfiltrate them, like, what are you going to build? And so we've built this thing that makes it really easy to connect to your LLM backend using a Tailscale identity. And if you combine that with device posture and Tailscale, it gives you this nice ability to contain that agent in a space where it can do its work without having really the ability to do too much damage. In the worst case, it like wipes out a VM or something like that, and you turn off the VM and start a new one.
We saw a lot of that over the last few weeks it's not called ClaudeBot, it's not called MaltBot, it's now called OpenClaw. A huge security risk from that one.
And a very popular one, and Tailscale has the sort of interesting, I don't know what you can say, we've become attached to it because the installation instructions for OpenClaw recommend using Tailscale to give it access to all of your internal stuff. And of course, Tailscale makes that super easy. And so we're kind of like, I guess, in the interesting position of making your security worse and better at the same time. So it's very important to us. Like OpenClaw is this really interesting agentic AI project that is also a great example of how not to do things. And Aperture is trying to be like, here's an example of how you should do things. How can you make it in the Tailscale, the standard Tailscale way? How do you reduce friction so everybody in your organization can adopt AI as fast as possible for the things they should be adopting it for while increasing security? Right? And OpenClaw is like, it's kind of funny, but if they had Aperture at the time they launched OpenClaw, that would be at least one less key that OpenClaw could accidentally exfiltrate when it joins its social network or whatever and starts reading instructions.
So I think at this point I'm going to take a moment and sort of distill what you've said down a little bit, because Aperture to me it's an AI gateway. So essentially you take all of your Tailscale clients and you funnel all of the Tailscale traffic through the Aperture gateway, and then Aperture does all the speaking to Anthropic, OpenAI, all of the upstream models, all the commercial models, and Aperture can speak to all of those guys, which means you eliminate API key sprawl, which is real. I mean, we hand out to date at least, security teams hand out API keys to developers like they're candy. Where now it's centralized inside Aperture, and you can see and get visibility into every single thing that your folks are using AI for in your company.
Yep, I just talked to somebody last week and they were saying like, hey, I just rolled out 3,500 Anthropic keys, one to every employee at my company, and every single one of those keys is basically an open line on my credit card. If any of those keys leaks and someone starts using it, they get basically free tokens from Anthropic that we're paying for. And so it's a huge problem, just the problem of distributing keys. And I think anybody who's used Tailscale is familiar with like, look, Tailscale, you don't have to distribute keys. We handle that part for you. It becomes part of your Tailscale identity. And we can turn it off instantly if it turns out it's like left your computer. So it's this really beautiful, like you can onboard everybody in your company with zero key distribution. They just like, they can download Claude Code, for example, put in a static text file that doesn't have any keys, and off they go. They've never been to the Anthropic website.
Yeah, speaking of identity, Kabir, perhaps I might pull you in on this one. Every single request that gets made from Claude Code, from OpenAI Codex, that goes via Aperture is identity first. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, so Tailscale handles identity kind of the whole way through, right? So Tailscale brings the identities in, either using the Tailscale identity of the device that you've installed Tailscale on, the user identity of the user that's accessing the device that Tailscale is installed on, or, as we'll hear about a little later today, the workload identity that's federated by some external third party. And that gets pushed through to whatever the target device is. And in this case, it could be a gateway that talks to your LLMs, or a service that proxies to a proxy that proxies to the service that you want to talk to, or a machine that's actually hosting the thing you want to talk to. So it's all built native into Tailscale's like core technology.
Yeah, essentially every single packet that leaves your Tailscale client is somehow attributed back to you and your identity. So we know when a packet lands in Aperture where it originated from. And so we can reuse that identity to say, hey, Alex is working with Claude today and he's used X number of tokens in this session, and you can have essentially an AI leaderboard in your company and see who's winning the AI awards this week. It's always Raj, I find, at Tailscale that's winning.
Raj is our all-time winner so far. He's hard to keep up with. But yeah, one of the neatest things about Aperture is it is based on Tailscale, so it's using the Tailscale network. So for example, like an LLM gateway proxy server fundamentally is like, doesn't sound that exciting, but the fact that it has Tailscale in the backend means that someone who is on your team could be hosting a model on their GPU in their office, on their desktop, even at home, and share that model with everybody else on their team. And you have like accounting for who's able to use it, but you don't have to worry about firewalls, location, or anything. So you can have backend models hosted at multiple different places. You can share models depending on Tailscale security policy that you've configured. People in this group are allowed to access this. People in this group get a bigger quota for that. We have an MCP proxy included, so if you're forwarding through to an MCP server, you can have it like include your Tailscale identity in the connection it's making out to an MCP server. So it just gives you these like wonderful tools for being able to blend things together and roll out AI in a safe, secure way.
Now, as you'll see in the demo with Remy in just a few seconds, we're going to show you how Aperture by Tailscale can help you simplify your AI adoption.
Aperture is an AI gateway built on Tailscale. It sits between your coding agents and every model provider they use, including Anthropic, OpenAI, Bedrock, OpenRouter, and Vercel. And it gives you complete visibility into how agentic AI is being used across your organization. When I open Aperture, it already knows who I am. There's no separate login. My Tailscale identity is my Aperture identity. I can see my own usage, total requests, total tokens broken down by input, output, and cache tokens, and which models I've been using. This is my personal view, but every developer on the team gets their own version of this. They can see their usage, debug their own sessions, and understand which models are working best for them. Now, on the logs page is where it gets interesting for admins. Every coding agent that goes through the gateway is collated into a single entry. Instead of seeing a stream of hundreds of raw API requests, each Claude Code or Codex session is grouped together. You can see who ran it, which models were used, how many requests and tokens it consumed, and how many tool calls the agent made. I can even drill down into any session to see the full detail, every request, every response, the tool calls the agent made, the bash commands it ran. If something goes sideways, like an agent burning through tokens in a loop or doing something unexpected, you can understand exactly what happened by digging in here. This is the tool call dashboard. Every tool call made by every coding agent across the company is extracted and surfaced here. Bash commands, file reads, file writes, grep operations, and every MCP tool call. You can see the breakdown over time, filter by specific tools, and click into any session to see exactly what the agent did. This gives your security team a complete inventory of what AI agents are actually doing on developer machines without requiring any manual reporting or configuration. It's all inferred automatically from the traffic flowing through the gateway. Now, over on the adoption dashboard, we show token usage across your entire organization over time. You can see the breakdown by token type, for example, cache tokens in blue and raw input tokens in green, and it's easy to use these visualizations to understand usage. We've even been able to use this internally to quickly catch cost anomalies and resolve them. Below the graph, you get a per user leaderboard. You can see who your power users are, who's adopting AI tools, and where usage is concentrated. You can also break this down by model or by user agent to understand which models or agents are driving the most usage and cost. Now, on the settings page, this is where you configure Aperture. Each provider, including Anthropic, OpenAI, Bedrock, OpenRouter, Vercel, gets a single API key. You add it here once, and every developer on the tailnet gets access to that provider's models. No individual key distribution, and no key rotation headaches. Grants let you control who can access which models. So you can do things like open up Sonnet to everyone, but restrict Opus just to engineering. And hooks, they fire webhooks on specific events, like a new tool call being detected. And all of this data can be exported to S3 for your SIEM or other compliance workflows. Now, Tailscale makes the developer experience simple. Here's everything a developer needs to connect Claude Code to Aperture. An API key helper and a base URL pointing at the gateway. That's it, 2 lines. Same story for Codex. Point it at Aperture, pick your model, and you're connected. Once that's set, your developers can open VS Code or their TUI and start working. Your coding agent is right there in the sidebar, running through Aperture. Every request is automatically attributed to their identity, logged, and visible in the dashboards we just walked through. In addition, you can push these configs via MDM, so every engineer is set up automatically with 0 manual steps. Aperture is the easiest way to bring AI to your engineering team, and the visibility that comes with it means that you always know what's happening, who's using what, and where your tokens are going.
Now, Tailscale Services launched originally in the fall update just a few months ago. Kabir, in fact, we were on the podcast together talking about it. It just feels like yesterday. And an exciting announcement. Tailscale Services is now generally available.
Yes, it time really does fly, doesn't it? So back in the fall, we talked about Tailscale Services kind of unlocking the next step of the types of resources and applications that you can put on your tailnet and leverage Tailscale's identity-first networking technology upon. It kind of like shifts a bit how you can think about the types of things that you can put on the tailnet. At first, it was just devices, right? And devices are amazing because they host all of your applications. They can be VMs, they can be laptops, they can be your network attached storage, they can be anything else. What we've consistently found is that customers wanted to have more granular access controls and have more granular identities. And so we launched services in the fall, kind of addressing that problem. And what we've heard as feedback throughout the few months intervening is that it's not just granular access to resources, it's also the context that an application might have. So we'll talk a little bit today about bringing some of that context to the technology that we released with services.
Of course, Tailscale Services is a way to decouple your actual Tailscale infrastructure from the URLs that you're using to access it. What's been like the coolest use case that you've seen with services since it was introduced just a few months ago?
We've seen quite a variety of use cases. So fundamentally, before we jump into it, what we're doing with services is we're giving you a stable, consistent magic DNS name. That's just a DNS name that you can easily remember. Like Acme might have an application called app. So all you have to remember is app. And if you're a user, that's great because you don't need to remember that the app is hosted in AWS US West and AWS US East. You just have to remember that it's called app and you can go there. And now your network engineering team or your developers that are building that application can tie it to the Tailscale virtual IP address that we give out for every single service and tie those to any of the instances available. So they can do things like roll out new updates to the app. You just have to remember that it's called app. They can shut down devices that are running old versions. They can take a whole data center out of rotation. They can weather internet storms like maybe Verizon cutting the line in that connects you to AWS US East or connects you to US West. All of that is just kind of like built in out of the box. And so some of the use cases we've seen are around high availability. Like, hey, I want to take this really simple internal application that suddenly my team's grown from 200 to 400 and it no longer can take the load on one box, but we don't want to put a network load balancer in front of it, or we don't want to put a service mesh in front of our Kubernetes like clusters that's for this really tiny little thing that maybe is just internal and not production grade. Or you can put it in front of like a secret storage and make that secret storage highly available. We had a customer put an entire internally built secret storage mechanism behind services so that it could be accessed globally by their teams in Singapore, their teams in the UK, and their teams in the US.
Or you could have someone like Harry come along and integrate TSNet directly using services. Talk us through that, Harry.
Sure. Yeah, so for anybody who is unaware, TSNet is Tailscale as a library. This allows folks to build Tailscale directly into their application without needing to install the client on the host running the application. So the integration of services into TSNet means that developers can make their TSNet applications highly available. And we made the API for this look a lot like existing API for running servers on your tailnet. And so transitioning a TSNet application to a highly available one is something that a developer could do in minutes, really.
So if I can put the pieces together, I think services are like deceptively, they sound kind of complicated, but the way you actually use them is not that complicated, right? So a single instance of Tailscale, which can be on a VM or in a container or in an application using TSNet or anything, now has the ability to publish multiple names onto your tailnet and appear like as many services as you want. And it can be dynamic, so like maybe this is a service that advertises other services that it finds, and it just like spins up new names depending on what it sees on the other side of a subnet router or anything you want. Because it's built into TSNet, you can write a program that does any kind of probing it wants, finds any kind of backing information or configuration it wants, and then publishes services based on that pattern. The other thing services does is the other way around. You can have the same service name published by as many instances of Tailscale nodes as you want. So that is what gives you high availability. The combination of the two, you can build load balancing and stuff on top. So this is a really neat building block that allows you to assemble like really complicated networks. And one of the really fun parts that enterprises like to do is put it on a subnet router. Now you can advertise all the different machines behind your subnet router as separate named Tailscale services, which gets them a nice TLS certificate. It gets them a DNS name in Magic DNS. It gets them access controls, and it gets them network flow logs that are separate from what would normally go with the rest of the node. Also, Aperture is built on TSNet with services. And so how do you scale up Aperture to like the 3,500 people in a company that I was just talking about? Well, you spin up as many apertures as you need in as many geographic regions as you need, and they all go to like http://AI to send their traffic through. And it just sort of magically works. Tailscale handles all that stuff. So you just get down to the business of like building your service.
I knew you'd find a way to link it back to Aperture somehow.
I'm going to do that in every single section.
I'm sure you will. And Kabir, I'm going to trust that you're going to link it back to Kubernetes somehow, right?
Of course. And you know, I wouldn't say it's just Kubernetes. One really interesting pattern that we're seeing with a lot of the customers that have come along with the ride for us throughout our beta and previously like proofs of concepts and alpha versions of this product is they're democratizing access to the internal applications and services that their developers are building. And they're making a consistent pattern really with their like platform or network engineering teams through which their developers can publish things to the tailnet. So that might be on Kubernetes, that those developers are using the Kubernetes API and our operator in a language they're really already used to developing in. And then automatically adding those things to the tailnet, maybe letting those Kubernetes clusters talk to other clusters in kind of a lightweight service mesh methodology across regions or clouds, or letting some of their developers talk to the in-flight or in-progress builds that are being deployed to staging and development environments across the organization. And so that helps with things like observability, ease of use, scaling the organization. As Avery said, letting the developers get back to just building the apps and not dealing with like the networking. And managing your IT sprawl, what's actually happening in the organization. So it kind of attacks things from every angle.
Now, we get tons of feature requests coming in all sorts of places. GitHub issues, Discord comments, Hacker News, comment threads, Reddit. Like we honestly, we read them all. YouTube comments, of course, is another one these days. We read a lot of them. And I'm delighted to say that we've added a really exciting new feature to services simply because of some feedback we got. Well, what was that, Kabir?
Yeah, it's a very good point. We read a lot of the feedback that we get, and we get it through a lot of different channels. And one of the consistent things we heard was that customers wanted to deploy services that were not hosted on Tailscale nodes. So they could be networked locally near the Tailscale node. And that kind of gets to what Avery talked about a little bit earlier. Sometimes you might have a Tailscale device that has things on the network that maybe can't install Tailscale or needs to multiplex as kind of like a little bit of like a gateway in a sense to other resources on the network. You can very easily forward packets and let something else handle the last mile networking, but get the TLS cert, get the service level access control on that box that's running Tailscale. So you can talk to remote services and advertise those remote services to the tailnet.
So cool. So you can kind of treat services a little bit like a reverse proxy now.
Yeah, in some sense.
And it's one step closer to finally having my printer on my tailnet.
Exactly.
And now I've got Linkin Park in my head, one step closer. Thanks for that. Okay, now let's move on to peer relays because they've also been moved into the generally available status this week. So we are cooking out the features this week, cranking them out this week. Peer relays are generally available. Peer relays are a way to essentially give yourself a alternative to Tailscale's free DERP network, the direct, what does it stand for? Direct Encrypted Relay Proxy or something?
So the joke in the early days of Tailscale is that we would never expand the DERP acronym twice the same way, and I think you've successfully continued that trend.
Well, I'm happy. Thanks for that. Okay, well, DERP, D-E-R-P, that's what we'll go for. You can keep an eye out on the YouTube channel for a video, a full deep dive on that tomorrow from me. But just a quick refresher, Kabir, on what peer relays are, if you don't mind.
Yeah, peer relays are a method of getting high performance and reliable connectivity to restrictive networks. For customers who have networks in maybe AWS cloud environments where there's network load balancers or NAT gateways in front of it, or you're in an office with a restrictive firewall like Palo Alto or Barracuda or something else, or you're just at home and you have multiple layers of ISP NAT, we kind of categorize all of those things as hard NAT internally and externally. And historically, what that meant was we'd use DERP to relay your traffic because DERP is kind of what makes Tailscale magic. It makes your network alive and reliable and always able to connect to other things on the network. But often we found you might need high performance throughput to those networks or to the resources in those networks. So peer relays are here. You can hold them. You can put them up on any Tailscale node that's running Linux. And instead of relaying over DERP in those scenarios, we relay through the peer relay.
So now, Avery, how do we link this back to Aperture? How are peer relays related to Tailscale's new API gateway?
Great question. So the important thing is like peer relays are an improvement to Tailscale's data plane, right? The DERP server itself has been open source since basically the beginning. The problem with running your own DERP servers is that in order for the Tailscale overall system to work, you have to be able to connect to any DERP server that is configured for your tailnet, right? So you can't put a DERP server like behind a firewall, where it's the best place to do relayed traffic to things that are behind that firewall, because if anything can't get through that firewall, the network can become sort of, for the IRC fans in the world, net split, right? You end up with like two different worlds where some of the nodes can't talk to some of the other nodes. And so we had this problem where like DERP it has to be the network of last resort. So it doesn't have to be necessarily that fast, but it has to be everywhere and it has to have connectivity to everybody. The peer relays design is really neat. You can drop these in any place you want, but you don't need to have connectivity to all of them. So you can put them close to the problem, wherever your problem might be, and Tailscale will try all the available peer relays, and if any pair of nodes that needs to talk is able to talk through at least one peer relay, they get the speed up, right? And so you have this ability to drop it into any location, and it just like makes your network better. And of course, Aperture, everybody wants to be connecting to the front ends and back ends of their AIs. There's lots and lots of people in lots of strange data centers with really strange firewall rules and a need for very, very high performance data throughput to get like real-time video generation, like heavy-duty training loads and stuff like that. And the GPU is the best price on GPUs is almost never right next to the place where that's best to run your application, right? So the kinds of people who need really high throughput AI traffic are the kinds of people who need peer relay. And Aperture, of course, can forward that traffic, but it forwards it a lot better if it can do it over a high performance network.
There you go. 10 points for that one. That was a very good link.
I will. I might add to that a little bit because what Avery mentioned is backed up by a lot of the data that we see in the usage of peer relay. So some of our customers that walked through this with us in the beta period deployed peer relays in production. And that's kind of what we've been working on, is really vertically scaling the peer relays so it can accept the types of load that some of these AI companies or AI native companies really want to push through into those networks. And so we've seen customers push many terabytes of traffic per week through their peer relays. Some of them are really only using 2 or 3 peer relays to push terabytes of traffic into those restricted networks. And a lot of those companies are AI native or AI first companies.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you look at the Derp network in general. You can. I mean, it's a free service, and as a consequence, it's shared amongst every Tailscale user. So we do a lot of quality of service and sort of making sure that everybody has a good experience stuff to that traffic. And consequently, it's not designed around performance, it's designed around availability.
And fairness.
And fairness, yes, thank you. And peer relays allow you to basically run the pipe as fast as the ISP peering will let you. So for me, for example, in the video you'll see tomorrow, derps were running at about 30 to 40 megabits a second, and a peer relay was running 15 plus times faster than that. I was doing no special configuration on EC2, no tuning, nothing other than a peer relay. It's a really cool feature, and I think that our user base are going to get a lot out of it.
I'll chime in as well. It's remarkably easy to set up. I played around with it a little myself, and it's as simple as just telling one node to act as a peer relay and then telling your ACL to allow that node to be a peer relay.
As long as you remember to forward the correct UDP port, not what this guy did, and a TCP port, because it won't work with a TCP. It's got to be a UDP port.
Yeah. But you know what? It didn't break your tailnet when you forgot that.
No, it didn't. No.
Right? That's the problem
Derp
we
just
had
carried on working.
Yeah, in theory, you've been always able to add your own derp servers to your network and turn off the rate limiting on derp servers. But the problem is it turned out to be so fiddly, guaranteeing that every node you might have in the world is able to connect to every derp server you add, that we've been like heavily discouraging people from trying it. Because like, guys, you don't know what you're getting into. It's a lot harder than it sounds. And peer relays just like solve that problem. And that's what feels like magic.
And it's useful as well, like if you're hosting a Jellyfin server or something that's got like video streaming components, derps are not designed for that. You will never get a good experience streaming video that way. But peer relays let you stream high bandwidth applications just fine, like video, security cameras, whatever, AI workloads, whatever it needs to be. Okay, now added to the generally available list, I have Workload Identity Federation. This is a way to tie different credentials and authenticate them to your tailnet using the Tailscale API.
So I really like workload identity. This one is definitely one of those things that, at least at first, sounds pretty enterprisey. But like it fits into the big picture of Tailscale, because like what is it fundamentally that Tailscale does, right? It takes your login identity, which you have to get once, and that turns that into an identifier for your device that it then uses for encryption keys, and then it uses those encryption keys in all of your mesh network traffic, right? The tricky bit is getting that identity onto your device in the first place. So if you're a human with a laptop, it's not a big deal. We make you pop up a window, and then it authenticates against your SSO, and off you go. But if you're trying to deploy stuff in the cloud, in a service mesh like we just talked about, in a Kubernetes cluster, in GitHub Actions, in VMs, in containers, in Lambdas, whatever, you have to somehow get an access key for Tailscale deployed to all those devices. And then once you have an access key, you run into the fact that we expire those access keys at least every 90 days because we can't trust you, and it's nothing personal, but we can't trust you to actually rotate those credentials on a regular basis. And if any of those credentials leak, then you have this problem that like, hey, somebody has stolen the credential, they can get into my network using this access key. Right? So then we tried to solve that problem by using OAuth clients, which automatically rotate the keys and have a smaller set of permissions attached to them. So that's pretty good, but you still have the problem where like if the OAuth client leaks, you have to trace where it leaked to and like shut it down. The really neat thing about workload identity is it uses the identity information that you already trust. So if you're using AWS and you trust their IAM system, you can say, I trust AWS's IAM system. If someone's running a VM in Amazon, then they deserve a Tailscale identity on my tailnet, right? Because I know that it's running inside of my AWS account. And applicable to a lot of developers, we have a built-in integration with GitHub Actions. So we can say, if someone in my GitHub organization is running a GitHub action and they install Tailscale into the GitHub runner, just trust it. You don't need a key. We already know it's GitHub. If GitHub was compromised, my entire product would be compromised anyway, right? We can just let this thing into my tailnet and default to having the right permissions. And then you don't have to configure anything, any keys anywhere. And in fact, the people who set up your GitHub Actions don't even need to know that you're using Tailscale. You can apt-get install Tailscale inside the action, and it just automatically starts working, and off you go.
And before you think, what do I use Tailscale for in a GitHub action, which I certainly did a few years ago, but I've seen the light since then. We have a really interesting video on the channel talking from the Octoprint developer and talking about how she uses Tailscale's GitHub Actions runner to talk to local hardware that fits physically on the desk in front of her from the cloud. And Tailscale's connectivity and NAT-traversal technology actually makes that a really simple and straightforward process. Don't forget to get registered for Tailscale's user conference. As I say, that's coming back for, I think, the second incarnation of it. And it's going to be in San Francisco in August this year, August 26th. And you can pick up a ticket today, $200 off until the end of March, by going to tailscale.com/tailscaleup. Also, throughout the rest of this week, huge amount of stuff coming with the winter update that we haven't talked about in this episode. It was already long enough. We've already picked the bits that we think are really cool, but there's still plenty of other cool stuff coming down the pipe as well. So just a reminder, Aperture by Tailscale, you can get started by going to aperture.tailscale.com. There's a wait list over there where you can get signed up, so as soon as extra capacity becomes available, you can get access to that. Tailscale Services is now generally available, which is the easiest way to connect devices together without being coupled directly to where the device physically lives. Peer relays are now also generally available for a really highly performant way to connect your infrastructure together if you're doing high bandwidth applications like video streaming or AI workloads. I'm turning into Avery here, relating everything back to Aperture, but there you go. And of course, Workload Identity Federation, as you just heard about, is now generally available as well. So really, all of this, to me, speaks to how Tailscale is moving away from being just a VPN, like I said at the beginning, towards being a connectivity platform. So, Avery, could you just give us a couple minutes on how this is all starting to fit together into your grand plan?
The grand plan. So, or what I call the grand scheme. So ultimately, this comes down to like networking has been too hard for a couple of decades now, and because of certain things that have been fundamentally missing from the internet protocol since the beginning, and a few things that have gotten worse since the beginning, such as firewalls and NATs that prevent actually getting peer-to-peer connections. So Tailscale, the first thing
nobody mentioned IPv6 either. By the way.
Yeah,
it's coming.
As soon as it's fully deployed, I'll start talking about it. That's estimated to be in the next 30 years, literally. Anyway, so first thing Tailscale did is we rolled out a mesh connectivity network and an identity system and encryption. They just sort of like immediately get us to like, okay, now peers can communicate. Now they have identity built in, so you don't need to do all this extra authentication stuff. And yes, it's always encrypted. And always end-to-end encrypted, so you don't have to worry about people sniffing on your data, right? Once you have that, it gives you this new set of tools that I think people have not yet adapted to. And Tailscale's been around now for very nearly 7 years. Next month, it's going to be 7 years, right? And people are only barely starting to get the idea that like, hey, something just fundamentally changed. And so we are building stuff on top, trying to show people like, hey, it's not just a little bit fundamentally changed. You can build things with TSNet that just don't have any of the problems that you're used to having. You don't have to worry about high availability anymore because of services, right? You don't have to worry about authentication because of workload identity, right? And you don't have to worry about your AIs getting out of control because you have Aperture, right? And Aperture itself, we actually carved out a separate team that was led by my co-founder. And we said, like, the only thing you're not allowed to do is ask the core Tailscale team for help, right? You get to build on the Tailscale platform, and if there's problems, you're going to have to hack around the problems. Like, show us how it's done. Show us how an outside company could build something on the Tailscale platform that just avoids all these problems. And you know what? Aperture does not have a login screen. When you go to try it, it uses Tailscale's login to authenticate a TSNet node that goes on your Tailnet. Right? We never had to build authentication. We never had to build OAuth, right? We never had to put in encryption. We had built-in logging, right? We have built-in access control policy that's controlled by your Tailnet policy, right? Administrator versus user is controlled by your Tailscale policy, right? How did we access like LLMs that are hosted on your coworker's home desktop with an expensive NVIDIA GPU? No problem, because Tailscale does that for you. Right? How do you define which MCP servers people are allowed to access? Because it's tagged a particular way, right? So it's amazing how much work this just obliterated from the problem space, right? And I think people do not yet understand like how much easier it suddenly is to build applications, and especially if you combine that with these like agentic coding systems, right? Where you can tell Claude Code like use TSNet to build me a service that does such and such, and just please don't bother with the authentication. And it'll like ask you for clarification. It's like, are you sure you don't want authentication? And you say, yes, I'm very sure. Don't put in the authentication, right? And it builds this simple program, and it's really hard. Like those things that Tailscale does are the things that are the easiest for agentic coding systems to screw up in a way that you can't detect, right? You look at it, did it get OAuth right? And it's like, I don't know. How am I supposed to know the answer to that? Nobody's an expert in OAuth. There is no one in the world who's an actual expert in OAuth, right? But now you don't have to. All those things you can do wrong to let the bad guys into your service and then attack your service disappear because your service is on the Tailscale network and only your friends are on your Tailscale network, right? So like suddenly coding is fun again, and it's doubled by the fact that now Claude can go off and write the code for you. Right? So it's just the combination is finally coming together. I think this year you're going to really see some really interesting stuff happening.
Yeah, for me, it talks to the fact that, you know, each of these features on their own might seem like a disconnected set of updates. But actually, when you start piecing the story together like that, everything that we're doing, we are being very deliberate about building a system here to match the way in which modern networking and modern systems are actually built moving forward.
Yeah, you're connecting everything to everything, right? But safely and with no friction.
Well, there we go. So please get subscribed to the channel for the rest of the winter update content coming throughout the week. Also, there'll be a bunch of stuff happening over on the Tailscale blog, tailscale.com/blog. Don't forget, I've already said it twice. I'm going to say it a third time. Tailscale Up is back in September? No, August. It's back in August. Come see us in San Francisco. We would love to say hi. As I say, early bird pricing, $200 off if you pick one up today. So thank you all very much for watching. Until next time, I've been Alex from Tailscale. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.